Thank you. So, hopefully this works. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Great. So Mike Mancini wrote this beautiful little sheet for me, but I'm not going to read it. But if you want a copy, I can email it to you, or I can put it online too, for all of you guys to enjoy. But we're here for Yago, one of my good friends. We've had a lot of times together, a lot of funny stories. If anybody's my friend, you know that I'm going to take you on a nice journey, a nice ride, and Yago's been a huge part of that. We've had smoothies together. No, seriously, we've had smoothies together. He's made me a slice of pie. So Yago shows to my house with my own personal pie. That makes you a legit friend. If somebody brings you a pie, you know it's real. And also we've gone through, tons of tough times, tons of great times, and we've done it together. I think Yago is the perfect person to talk to us today. He's a perfect person for me. He always bridges the gap for me. Sometimes I know, like recently, well, not recently. When you get old, my age, time, it's all the same. Right? So you don't realize, something can happen a year ago, and you think it happened last week. That's kind of where I am. So me and Yago, we went to the Oklahoma City Cleveland Cavaliers games together. And I'm just sitting back, I'm enjoying the game. Yago's sitting there next to me. And then, the dancing girls, they come down the aisle. So they come down the aisle, and I'm sort of a young guy, but so I look at the dancing girls, I'm like, oh, wow, those are some very attractive people. And then Yago sitting there next to me, he's like, well, why do they have to have stripper boots and limit, no clothing? So something that I took and I enjoyed, Yago completely just was like, he made me feel bad. So I looked at myself, why am I enjoying, I wasn't enjoying it. I was looking for a couple seconds for Yago, and this is kind of our friendship. He's like a mentor to me. He always challenges me to think outside of the box. He challenges me to be a better person, to be a better mentor, a better leader. Yago and also Claire, his wife, I consider them my Oberlin family. Any tough times, anytime I need to talk, how ridiculous it is. They'll make me pie and then they'll sit down and talk me through my issues, I guess. So you don't have to listen to me talk again. Let's introduce Yago.
And thank you all for taking time out of what I know are busy schedules to be here tonight. A couple things I want to get out of the way first. I'd like to thank my wife, Professor Claire Solomon, for bringing me into such a wonderful community. I'd like to thank Athletic Director Natalie Winklefuss for believing in the value of this conversation, and Mike Mancini and Jason Hudson for all their efforts in putting this together. Now, I'm also grateful to you because, among other reasons, I would understand if some of you wondered what I'm doing here. What could a professor from the University of Michigan possibly have to say that could be of any use to the faculty, students, and staff of Oberlin College on the topic of integrating athletics and academics on college and university campuses? Isn't that exactly the kind of problem we at Michigan should learn from you at Oberlin about how to solve? We'll see. I certainly do believe we can learn from you. And I don't wish to minimize the differences between our institutions in this area, but I do hope over the course of my talk tonight to complicate that simple dichotomy, among others. In the meantime, there is at least one precedent for the Oberlin, Michigan encounter that we're holding here this evening. On October 24th, 1891, a group of Oberlin College students hit the road to play the first intercollegiate football game in the school's history. Traveling a path I know too well, they headed to Ann Arbor to challenge the University of Michigan. Though Oberlin scored first, Michigan came from behind and won that game 24-6, apparently with the help of some home cooking by referee Horace Prettyman, who also happened to be a Michigan alum. But however enjoyable I find that coincidence, I know it's not likely to convince you that I belong here. If anything, it may draw your attention to the vastly divergent paths that the two institutions have taken in the 125 years since. For whereas Oberlin appears to have taken the high road of upholding the amateur ideals of integrating athletics and academics, Michigan now is home to one of the largest and most profitable athletic programs in the country. Fair enough. But even so, that game still provides a point of departure from which to explore the historical context shaping the emergence of intercollegiate athletics at American colleges and universities. So, I'm just going to get these out of the way as I finish. Oberlin students were permitted to play in that game because of the growing influence of a new view known as muscular Christianity, that physical activity was not a diabolical pursuit, as had long been held, but rather an aid in spiritual and moral development. In fact, Oberlin College, according to one historian, was a cradle for the fledgling physical education profession and muscular Christian movement. Professor Henry Churchill King, for example, who joined the faculty in 1884 and later became the longest-serving president of the college, believed that muscular Christianity and physical education could fortify the religious and moral sensibility of what he called a, quote, vacillating, flabby, self-indulgent generation, and lend vigor to Oberlin's vital mission of social responsibility. Among the most influential promoters of this view was Dr. Luther Gulick. Dr. Luther Gulick, Jr. Gulick had enrolled in Oberlin in 1885 at the age of 15, but he was plagued by migraine headaches that caused him to miss classes. You know how it is. Moreover, he had serious doubts about his career plans to follow his father's footsteps into the ministry. You know how that is too. One day, in 1885, Gulick and a roommate sat on a railed fence near Tappan Square, pondering their uncertain futures. I know you know how that is. Gulick wondered aloud whether physical education might have the same uplifting relation to the body as religious education had to the soul, and whether good bodies and good morals went hand in hand. I guess so, because Gulick soon dropped out of Oberlin, and the next year, in 1886, moved to Jackson, Michigan, just west of Ann Arbor, to direct the YMCA gymnasium there. He'd apparently found his calling, for a little later that same year, he was appointed director of the physical education department at the YMCA Training Institute in Springfield, Massachusetts. As director, among other things, Gulick designed the YMCA triangle logo, whose three sides symbolize mind, body, and spirit. And perhaps most famously, in the autumn of 1891, just when Oberlin and Michigan were squaring off on the gridiron, Gulick asked a younger colleague named James Naismith to devise a new indoor sport. Introduced to the world in this drawing, published in the January 1892 issue of The Triangle, a YMCA publication Gulick founded the year before. Naismith's new sport would spread rapidly across the globe, but in the 1890s, on college campuses anyway, football was king. That's why, long before Knowlton, and even before the big house up in Ann Arbor, there was this. Harvard Field was constructed in 1903 to accommodate 31,000 fans. The price tag of $310,000, a little over $8 million in today's dollars, was covered by past and projected future ticket sales and a $100,000 alumni donation, roughly $2.6 million in today's dollars. It may seem extravagant, but already in 1903, college football was big business. In fact, Harvard and Yale blazed a trail, as they have in so many other areas of American higher education, by introducing big money, dubious recruiting practices, and academic fraud into college sports. Now, some say that it was Yale's dominance of its football rivalry with Harvard. Some say that it was the growing number of injuries and even fatalities, or that these hit too close to home. But whatever it was, in 1905, Harvard alumnus and U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, shown here after a football practice at Harvard in the 1870s, summoned representatives of Yale, Harvard, and Princeton to the White House. From this meeting of the so-called Big Three, the Intercollegiate Rules Committee was born. And 5 years later, in 1910, that growing but still largely ineffectual body would change its name to one we know well today, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA. The association would continue to grow in size, though not in influence, over the course of the first half of the 20th century. But over the next half-century, it would become a powerhouse. First, in 1951, in the words of then NCAA President Walter Byers, the association, quote, crafted the term student-athlete to diffuse what he described as, again, these are his words, the dreaded notion that NCAA athletes could be identified as employees by state industrial commissions and the courts. The new phrase, student-athlete, indeed, helps protect member institutions against workmen's compensation suits filed by athletes injured or disabled during competition. And the NCAA continues to use it to this day in the courts to fend off attempts by athletes to empower themselves, for example, by forming a union. Now, the NCAA inherited its collegiate model from the so-called amateur ideal, which upper-class sportsmen in 19th century England had fabricated from the erroneous belief that ancient Greek athletes had competed without financial compensation. Wealthy Victorians invoked the amateur ideal to avoid competing with working-class rugby players, cricketers, boxers, and rowers who could not afford to play for nothing. Amateurism, in the words of historian Alan Gutman, was invented as an instrument of class warfare. Now, having firmly established the unpaid status of college athletes as the NCAA's bedrock principle, Byers next succeeded in 1952 in securing for the NCAA the exclusive right to negotiate television broadcasting contracts. Overpowering resistance from some colleges, Byers got NBC to pay the NCAA over $1 million, about $10 million today, for the rights to televise a dozen college games per week. Today, the nonprofit NCAA pulls in around $700 million annually in television revenues just from broadcasts of its Division I men's basketball tournament, sometimes called March Madness or the Big Dance, both of which terms, by the way, are trademarked by the NCAA. The NCAA even sells the right to provide the official ladder used by teams to cut down the nets after winning the title. All of which may shed some light on this. The NCAA posts this image on its website to explain the difference, first instituted in 1973, between what it calls Division I and Division III. Division I is represented by a pocket calculator on which appears the figure $62,200,000. The average budget for the 65 Division I Football Bowl Subdivision, or FBS, athletic programs, including Michigan's, whose annual budget is actually more than twice of this for athletics. Meanwhile, Division III, in which Oberlin's teams compete, is represented by a mortarboard to indicate that it has the highest graduation rates among NCAA athletes, which is true. It appears that Division III is all about the books, and that Division I is all about the Benjamins. When most Americans think of college sports, I suspect they think of one of the 65 institutions in the NCAA's FBS. The visibility and popularity of these schools' football and men's basketball teams, together with the enormous revenues they generate, lead many to put their focus here when thinking about the challenges posed by intercollegiate athletics. They might, to begin with, worry about growing commercialization and escalating expenses, in most cases subsidized by hidden fees paid by students, and so about a corruption of the mission of the universities and colleges. But given the massive revenues involved and the improbability that this rising tide of commercialization can be held back, others focus more on issues of economic exploitation, which sports economists gauge by calculating what a participant would earn were they sharing in the surplus revenues their performance generates in proportions similar to those found in American professional sports. This has led a growing number of observers to argue that athletes should be receiving a portion of these revenues, particularly when their coaches as at Michigan, are making several $1 million a year. Of course, many still resist this notion, arguing, among other things, that the college education these athletes receive in return for their efforts is adequate compensation. But educational researchers studying the matter express serious doubts that this is the case. For one thing, despite NCAA regulations stipulating that athletes may spend no more than 20 hours per week in season on athletic activities, a 2015 NCAA survey showed that the average Division I athlete spent close to 40 hours per week on their sport in the season. Given these time demands, coaches and academic counselors ensure players' eligibility, sometimes by steering them towards courses and majors viewed as less demanding in a practice known as clustering. In the process, athletes obviously are deprived of the chance to identify their intellectual passion for themselves and fail to receive academic preparation. But they also wind up segregated from the rest of the student body and thus miss out on the social experiences and professional networking opportunities enjoyed by other students. No wonder then that the pressures of attempting to meet these unrealistic demands experienced within the insular culture of athletics lead to stress, rising reports of mental illness, and of course academic underperformance. This troubling phenomenon becomes more disturbing when one considers the overrepresentation of black males on revenue-generating college athletic teams, together with racial disparities in graduation rates. In view of these figures, we can see why Professor Billy Hawkins of the University of Georgia would describe this system as the new plantation. Oh wait, I need sound. Let's see how we get sound. It's probably worth it.
A what? Send him in.
Hello there. The name is Eric P. Cartman. I'm a well-respected owner in the slave trade.
In the what?
My peaches, what a wonderful office you got yourself, y'all. Certainly got yourself a lucrative business, don't you? Well, let me get right down to it then. Like yourself, I'm also in the slave trade. But at the moment, I find myself in a little quandary with legal issues. Was wondering if you could share some secrets.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You have some mighty strong-looking workers here, sir. I've been willing to offer you $40 for 2 of the white ones and $50 for the blacks.
Are you referring to our student athletes?
Student athletes. Oh, that is brilliant, sir. Now, when we sell their likeness for video games, how do we get around paying for our student athletes then?
Look, there are good reasons why our student athletes cannot be paid, young man.
I ain't arguing. If they got paid, then how do we make all our money, right?
We do not own slaves, and we have no desire to own slaves.
But of course you own slaves because right. Of course you don't have desire to own slaves, son. Neither do I. And if there was any government agency listening in on this here conversation, they should know that we're not talking about slave ownership at all. Alright, so now how do you get around not paying your slaves?
Get out. This is a prestigious university, and I am not saying one more word to you.
You think you can do whatever you want just because your corporation is a university? This country was founded on the idea that one corporation could clog all the slaves while the rest of us follow in property. Do you, sir? I'm going home.
So that's kind of funny. But wait a minute. Serious though these concerns about economic exploitation and educational injustice at places like Michigan may be, what do they have to do with Division III colleges like Oberlin, where there are no athletic scholarships, no fat television contracts, and no highly paid coaches? In other words, most of us share what William Bowen and Sarah Levin called the unstated assumption accompanying many critiques of big-time college sports, namely, that all is well at colleges and universities that provide no athletic scholarships. Facing a lack of research on these issues in Division III, Bowen and Levin undertook to test that assumption and discovered that it is largely, not entirely, unsupported by the data they gathered on D3 schools in various categories, including Oberlin College. I should say that there really is a lack of research in this area, and Bowen and Levin's study draws mostly on data from the 90s and early 2000s, even though the book was published more recently, so some of this may not apply anymore. But overall, they found a steadily widening academic-athletic divide that suggests that more can be done to integrate academics and athletics at Division III institutions. Specifically, Bowen and Levin discovered that athletes at co-ed liberal arts colleges tended to cluster in certain majors in ways that are not representative of the student body as a whole. They also found that these athletes appear significantly lower in their class rank. And, as in Division I, African American men are disproportionately represented in certain high-profile sports. All in all, these issues may be partly the result of another problem Bowen and Levin documented qualitatively, and which may be more important. Varsity athletes at Division III schools experienced discrimination from faculty, stigmatization by their peers, and isolation, and so suffered from stereotype threat. Some, for example, avoid wearing athletic gear to class for fear that they will be prejudged as inferior students. Athletes at such institutions, much like their Division I peers, in other words, appear to be caught in the crossfire between two distinct, often conflicting cultures on campus, the athletic and the academic, each of which tends to mistrust, shun, or simply show no interest in the other. Adding insult to injury, Division III athletes put nearly as many hours a week into their sport as their Division I counterparts. Though more research needs to be done, I think Bowen and Levin have identified some important problem areas in Division III athletics. But I also think they underestimate the important contributions that athletics and athletes can make to their college communities. The solution to the problems they diagnose lies not, as they proposed, in further constraining athletics at such institutions, but rather in developing more imaginative means of integrating athletics with academics. For athletes are, in my experience, both at Michigan and here at Oberlin, highly capable, self-disciplined, goal-oriented young men and women with a great deal to offer their communities, not only on courts, fields, tracks, and in swimming pools, but also in classrooms, laboratories, and studios. Which is to say, they present us, their faculty, administrators, and peers with great opportunities. We might better recognize and avail ourselves of these opportunities if we were more imaginative in our attempts to integrate athletics into our academic community. In doing so, we'd be better serving all of our students, athletes and non-athletes alike. Now, I confess I can get a bit overwhelmed by the kind of big picture of systemic problems that I've just sketched. Still, what is it y'all used to say around here? So do I. I not only believe one person can change the world, I believe we all, in fact, are always changing the world. Which is why I also believe in the vital importance of expertise in guiding our efforts to do so. Yet, I am neither an economist nor a lawyer, neither a sociologist nor an educational expert. What I am is a humanities professor, one with a special interest in stories and expertise in understanding how they serve to help us organize our experience of ourselves and the world, to connect us to others, and to empower us to imagine new ways that we might be in the world with others. Some professors study the stories that emerge, for example, from war or dictatorship or revolution. I happen to think, study, teach, and write about the stories that emerge from sport. So when I want to change the world, I draw on my expertise, focus on my classroom, and turn to my students and the stories they carry. Now, in my classroom, I can expect on average that around a quarter of my students will be varsity athletes at Michigan. In this, my experience may appear exceptional, but perhaps not in the way you are thinking. Or, as a matter of fact, it is exceptional at Michigan, where less than 4% of the 27,000 undergraduates compete in varsity sports. But here at Oberlin, it turns out, close to 20% of the undergraduates participate in a varsity sport. Therefore, if you're a faculty member here, even if you are not, like me, teaching a course about sports, there's a good chance that, just like me, 1 in 5 of the students in your class is playing a sport. So it turns out we share some common ground after all. Not only do we teach comparable percentages of athletes in our classes, but their psychological and social and to some degree academic experiences are remarkably similar. So with that in mind, let me turn to the sunnier side of my talk. Now it's going to be fun. Cultures of Basketball is an upper-level undergraduate humanities course I teach that typically enrolls around 25 students, both non-athletes and varsity athletes, men and women, and often including a few men's varsity basketball players. This mix presents challenges to me on the very first day. The academic-athletic divide I was just talking about a few minutes ago is visible even in the way that the students segregate themselves within the classroom space. Their mutual wariness feels palpable to me, and my own classroom appears before me like a living embodiment of the problems I just described. Students are viewing one another, and perhaps themselves, through the deforming lenses of stereotypes. Stereotypes that are supported by unexamined, perhaps even unconscious stories that they've consumed. These stories, which have everything to do with our topic, the history of the culture of basketball, tend to oversimplify the world, sifting it out into mutually exclusive, hierarchically arranged categories: student versus athlete, jock versus nerd, to be sure, but more deeply still, producer versus consumer, black versus white, body versus mind. Accordingly, I see my primary pedagogical responsibility in the course to be to bring these stories to the surface, to help students disable them by understanding where they come from, how they work, and what they do, and then to create conditions in which they can experiment with crafting a different set of stories. Mostly this entails what you would expect to see in a college humanities classroom. Students read scholarly work on the technical, cultural, and social history of basketball. Oh, okay. Listen to occasional brief lectures, and especially participate in open-ended discussions. They also complete individual and collaborative assignments, including both traditional papers and more unconventional creative tasks. But as indispensable and valuable as these activities are, they are not, in my view, the most important way that we loosen the grip of these limiting stories or come to develop alternatives. I'm pretty sure that probably nothing we do in cultures of basketball looks less academically rigorous than the intra-class 3-on-3 tournament we hold at the end of each semester. That's right. And yet, I'm even more sure that nothing we do more powerfully or durably enables students to unchain themselves from the narratives they harbored at the beginning of the semester. First, the students form themselves into committees, integrating athletes and non-athletes to organize the tournament. In the process of doing so, they must collaborate in order to critically put to practical work concepts they've been studying all semester. Then, in forming our teams, we extend this integrated collaboration further by separating the athletes out and mixing them with non-athletes. Finally, we spatially integrate the academic and athletic realms by exiting the classroom and holding class in the gym. The tournament itself takes what we've been doing in the classroom all semester and shows students that this same thing can happen on a basketball court, with our bodies and with fewer or different words. The walls of our classroom fold down like a cardboard box, and out we tumble into the world. First, we sat at desks, we read books, we thought and argued and wrote. And now, we set picks, we catch bounce passes, we shoot jumpers, we help on defense, we argue calls and talk trash, and some of us anyway express ourselves with dunks. Each of us thinks and acts at once, and all of us together cooperate and compete. The tournament embodies and expresses our overcoming of old stories and forms the basis for new ones that we see firsthand can survive out in the world. It celebrates humanity, growth, and friendship. As I hope you'll recognize in this video, that the students themselves shot and edited, applying course concepts to creatively reappropriate the music and the visual structure of the iconic self-congratulatory highlight montage with which the NCAA closes its telecast of the men's national championship game each year. This is awesome. Before moving on to the proposal I promised you my title, I want to share one brief anecdote that I hope will convey what this experience can do. The young man in this picture was a freshman student in Cultures of Basketball when I taught it during the second semester of 2013, when this photo was taken. Some of you will recognize him. His name is Mitch McGarry. And while we were doing all the things in class that I described above, Mitch and his teammates were also playing their way to the NCAA championship game. In the weeks that followed, which coincided with the closing days of our semester, Mitch was deciding whether to declare himself eligible for the NBA draft. Considering the millions of dollars he risked losing if he were injured, I'd have understood if Mitch preferred not to play in our tournament. But he played. In fact, he and his teammates, Evan and Lauren, won our tournament, and Mitch was chosen by his classmates as most valuable player. Big surprise. But it wasn't just Mitch's time. His teammate Lauren told me before we played that she always loved basketball, but for most of her life had been just a spectator. And when she did play it, it was just shooting games like Horse or Around the World. But at the end of the tournament, with Lauren beaming, Mitch placed his most valuable player medal around her neck. What did this mean to her? Here's what she told me afterward. I loved that I didn't feel like I was letting anyone down in this tournament. I could shoot and miss, and that was okay. I tried. We were in it together. The last game, Mitch told me I was clutch. That's right. He also kept saying that it was the team and not him, which I am not so sure that is true. Like at all. But he really made me feel like the three of us did it together. Lauren added that when she went back to her dorm after the tournament, the first thing she did was phone her dad, who called her Champ, and sweetened Lolo, which was her official tournament nickname, for 3 days. That weekend, with the semester over, she went home and she and her dad went to the park on the corner to shoot hoops. I'm proud of this, but I'm not delusional. I don't imagine that this course is revolutionary, or that it by itself solves the many problems our current model of intercollegiate athletics poses, whether at Michigan or at Oberlin. But I do firmly believe it suggests one very concrete way that we, especially as faculty, but really all of us, can do a better job of integrating academics and athletics on our campuses, so that our creative, hardworking, and talented students do not, at the very moment in life when they are trying to become integrated adults, have to fragment themselves, slough off some seemingly undesirable component of their being as the price paid for growing and learning and being full members of our communities. About a year ago, Professor Arian Waite proposed in the Chronicle of Higher Education that when we embrace, this is a quote from her, when we embrace athletics as a true part of the academy and build an academic culture and organizational structure that values education through athletics, we can foster the collaboration and transparency that have never fully existed between athletics and the academy. When we can assist our students in the pursuit of their passion through legitimate academic structures, as we do in every other discipline, the shame in college sports will subside. I think she's right. As I understand it, a student at Oberlin College who wishes to complete a major in theater must complete 8 courses evenly distributed across 4 areas of concentration: Western theater history, performance, production and design, and critical inquiry, as well as 2 additional elective courses in one of these areas. Though I think we are so used to it that we often fail to notice, this is quite a remarkable thing. We encourage a student who feels theater to be an integral part of their being to cultivate that passion more fully through a coherent, rigorous curriculum, guided by expert faculty, and in the company of a diverse group of students who share that interest. According to the webpage of Oberlin College, of the Oberlin College Theater Department, an average of 18 students per graduating class major in theater, or just under 3% of last year's graduating class in arts and sciences. So here's my question. Why do we not encourage students who feel athletics to be an integral part of their being, to cultivate their passion through a coherent, rigorous curriculum guided by expert faculty and in the company of a diverse group of students who share their interests? After all, even just 1/5 of the Oberlin varsity athletes from a given graduating class would generate as many majors annually as the theater department. And this does not include the number of students who participate in one of Oberlin's club and intramural sports. Now, of course, I recognize that most students who are athletes at Oberlin have academic and career interests outside athletics. But even some of these may wish to combine those interests with a double major in sports studies. In short, it's not hard to imagine sports studies attracting a viable number of majors. But of course, student interest in an activity should not be the determining factor in whether we offer the opportunity to study that activity academically. If it were, we'd have majors in sex, beer, and weed. So no, a major should correspond to a legitimate field of scholarly activity, like say, I don't know, sports studies. It has been around for more than half a century and has grown rapidly, so that today one can find lively research programs and oftentimes dedicated academic journals pertaining to sport in all of the following disciplines, along with physics, biology, chemistry, computer science, statistics, business, management, economics, history, classics, sociology, psychology, anthropology, philosophy, communication, education, kinesiology, journalism, literary and cultural studies, and the fine arts. These scholars are drawn to the study of sport for many reasons. Some are former athletes themselves. Most will note that every day across the globe, sport engages hundreds of millions of human beings as both participants and spectators. Sport arguably occupies more of the leisure time of more people than any other human activity. And so most would share the view of Ben Carrington and David Andrews, two leading figures in the field, that sport is, quote, simultaneously a space in which we escape, to which we escape for fun, relaxation, and enjoyment. A space charged with social significance and political possibilities for expressing who we are as individuals and the larger communities to which we belong. And an embodied art form, a physically creative and aesthetic mode of being human. A world replete with all the ugliness and beauty, tragedy and joy that resides within human societies. A sports studies major would help students to challenge the popular dichotomy between, as Carrington and Andrews put it, the uninformed tirades of the anti-sport lobby and the often naive and idealistic accounts of pro-sports devotees. So what might it look like? I imagine that a sports studies major would include courses in some or all of the following areas of concentration: social, cultural, historical aspects of sport, athletic performance, sport management, production, and communications, sport sciences, and sport education. Which specific courses might fill these areas and how course requirements would be distributed would, as with any major, depend to some degree on the expertise of the faculty teaching them. For example, besides cultures of basketball, I currently teach 4 other courses that explore sport and documentary film, sport and creative writing, sport and aesthetic philosophy, and sport in a global social cultural context. Like any other major, sports studies would both acquaint students with general issues in each area and help them develop specialized expertise in one particular area as preparation for either further study or employment. Perhaps at some schools, some of these areas would not be viable or would play a smaller role or might require additional faculty resources. But as the 17th century philosopher Baruch Spinoza, one of my favorites, wrote at the end of his Ethics, all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. So let's aim high. If we can admit, with Washington Post columnist Sally Jenkins, that high-performance athletes study a craft with a science, a theory, a history, and a literature, just like music or dance or film majors do, and a craft that many indeed consider an art, no less than music or acting or writing or dance, it becomes hard for me to understand why we do not offer them a major whereby they may supplement their practical development of that craft with study of its various social, cultural, and scientific dimensions. Students with a degree in sports studies could position themselves for careers or further study in education, sport organization and management, journalism or communications, the social sciences, the humanities and fine arts, STEM fields, and many others. But it's not just the athletes who could benefit. Other students, too, could cultivate, deepen, and complicate their interest in athletics by majoring in sports studies. They no longer have to find ways to squeeze their passion for sporting culture in as a secret hobby alongside the demands of majors such as English or neuroscience. And by requiring participatory sporting experiences, majors who aren't varsity athletes would contextualize their intellectual comprehension of sporting phenomena within a more embodied experience, and thereby a more empathetic perspective. Perhaps most importantly, a sports studies major will offer all students an opportunity to understand a vital aspect of their experience. It will give them the tools needed to situate this experience in the broader contexts of both the past that preceded them and of the society and culture that has and will continue to shape them, and that they, in turn, will inevitably shape. It will permit them to integrate various important facets of their being that we currently require them to hold apart in stressful tension. And it will, in so doing, equip them, or rather, reveal to them the equipment they already have to elude the objectifying stories others script for them, and learn instead to write their own stories, and thus to become, as Nietzsche put it, the poets of their lives. Of course, making this happen will take commitment and focus, imagination and vision, cooperation, creativity, and courage. But these are qualities I know firsthand that you Obies have in abundance. After all, what is it you all used to say around here? Thank you.
So being at the University of Michigan, I mean, y'all are no strangers to controversies concerning boosters and stuff like that. So I was wondering in what ways you think that schools can reconcile the idea of these tainted athletes like Chris Webber and Todd Gurley, while still kind of recognizing that they've broken both school and NCAA policy.
So how schools can reconcile.
The kind of problem that these athletes are victims of their situation while at the same time they have broken like policy.
Right. Well, I don't know that schools can actually reconcile that. I mean, I think that in the specific instance you mentioned, rules were broken and Michigan received sanctions and sanctioned itself as a result. Came out of that, and the program is now doing well. I don't think it's had any issues since that time. But I don't think that that does anything to address the underlying kind of social and systemic circumstances that might lead to those kinds of situations, again, at Michigan or at some other institution. Those things are, to some degree, within the power of institutions to try to do something about, and the NCAA to try to do something about, and some of those issues are much bigger than any of those organizations, I would say. Does that answer the question? Yes?
Hi, yeah. First of all, I really thought your proposal was really nice, and I really enjoyed listening to that, but obviously I do find a couple of things that could be problematic.
Okay.
For example, I feel like a lot of the reason why there's so many, Black or African American basketball players, football players, is this huge complex causality of social and cultural and other historical things leading into like why that is today. So I feel like that would also carry over into sports studies. And second, like, do you have anything that might counteract the clustering effect in sports studies? Because I feel like a lot of people that did sports and also did sports studies would double major with something, and that would become a trend throughout that team, which would become a trend throughout the whole sports union. Like maybe, like I'm in sociology and sports, so maybe sociology and sports studies or something like that. So how would you counteract that clustering issue?
Right. Okay, so to the first point about racial overrepresentation, as you said, that's a much larger issue, right? I mean, it's a societal issue, as you well know. My feeling about that is that that issue needs to be tackled on many fronts. I'm focusing on what happens once our students are admitted into the University of Michigan. It's my job to give them an education, right? So at the same time, of course, it's my job also, as part of that education, to try to give them as much as possible tools for understanding the situation they are finding themselves in, where they've come from a different perspective than the one they themselves had about that. Okay. Second question about clustering, and I guess I take it that the gist of the question is, wouldn't that be a problem that would sort of be reproduced within sports studies?
Yeah.
I guess it could be. It's not my experience at Michigan. We don't have a sports studies major there, so I can't speak to that per se. But one thing I think is that while there are, like I say, about a quarter athletes, 25% athletes in my classes, there's a vast number of students who are also interested in sports for many different reasons, right? Some of them have to do with business, some have to do with humanities and the arts, et cetera, sociology. What I think, though, is that clustering in sports studies as a rigorous academic curriculum geared towards nourishing the educational aspirations of these students would be different than clustering as a phenomenon in which coaches and academic advisors are shunting students off towards courses that they believe or perceive to be easier and less demanding, right? So students, part of the problem with clustering is that it's not a student's choice. That's part of what I see as the problem with it, right? So hopefully this would be potentially different. But I get your point. I mean, I don't think that it would totally dissolve that issue.
Yeah, I'm coming from more of a psych, Travis does, the more like data, empirical research. So it would be interesting to see something like this actually implemented and see
what happens,
clustering
tracking it.
effect could-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I know that athletes' academic counselors at Michigan send some of their kids to my classes, right? And I also know that after they're done with my classes, the kids think, oh, shit, I thought this was going to be easy. And it's not. And they're happy that it's not. Blake.
I think that speaks to a bigger point, is that I think societally we've always felt, or it's been how do we make sure that it's held on the same, or how do we prove that it is a serious study? You know, how do we overcome?
Well, that's an educational matter. I mean, and, you know, we teach in lots of different ways, right? And send messages in lots of different ways. Some of that has to do with what we say in our classes or when we talk to people. Some of it has to do with the institutional structures we establish. So I would really agree with the professor in North Carolina, Arian White, who believed that scandals like the one at her school could be avoided if we actually established legitimate academic structures that might respond to the interests of not just the student athletes, but to some degree them, and others as well. And just by doing that, and maybe as the student said, you know, tracking it over time and seeing that it's legit, and then people start to see all the different kinds of work, research, and teaching that occur in this field all over the world. I mean, the list of disciplines, I think, is, you know, up to about 20 now, at least, where people are doing PhDs in this work. That's serious academic work. They don't give you a PhD just because it's a PhD in sociology of sport for not doing the work, any more than they give you a PhD just because, you know, in sociology of, I don't know what, science or something like that. I mean, it's a PhD. Is that?
Yeah.
Sam?
This is just so exciting. It's such a wonderful presentation. I find it compelling and convincing. And it's reminding me of a conversation that we were having a few years ago with a violist student. And maybe this is just something that people say in the conservatory, what do I know, because I teach in college. But she said, you know, really musicians are just athletes of the small muscles.
Yeah.
That was the first time I heard that phrase. I thought it was remarkable. And that punctured this illusion that I think we all in some way have, that Oberlin is the asylum that we flee to when you're trying to escape athletics at all costs.
Exactly.
And so maybe there's a kind of way, particularly thinking it from the point of view of the conservatory,
Yeah.
where there's in fact, you know, we're much closer to some kind of integrated engagement with this much deeper understanding of what sport is all about than we ever thought about ourselves.
I totally agree with that.
Cartoons.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I thought about using the conservatory or some of the programs within the conservatory as a sort of example, a lead-in example, but I wanted to choose something from the college, so I went with the theater department, which again is a performance-based, but not limited to performance, kind of field of study, right? Creative writing is similar, I would say. So any kind of, I would even probably be willing to try to argue that any academic discipline entails a performance component, whether or not we like to recognize it as academics, and most of us might have gone into it to try to avoid that kind of scenario. But, you know, here we are. I mean, here I am. So, I do think the conservatory is a really interesting kind of example to explore further. And I know, you know, Claire has a good friend who graduated from the conservatory here, I guess, right? Yeah. Who's now a world-class musician. And we've had a lot of conversations about the similarities and experiences that she's had as an elite musician and that some of the students I know have had as elite athletes. Yeah.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I was wondering about your opinion on athletes taking online classes.
Pardon me?
Oh, sorry. I was wondering your opinion on athletes taking online classes through the school, because one, they allow for travel and easier benefits to schooling if they're going on a trip for athletics, but also they take away from the athlete's experience at the university.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of online classes for anybody, honestly. That may be a kind of disciplinary prejudice of mine. It's impossible for me to conceive of how I could do my job as a teacher in the humanities online. Much though I have fantasized about doing it since I drive 2.5 hours back and forth to work on the days I teach. But I don't think it would work. But I also think that it's the wrong way to go about solving the problem that they're there to try to solve. I mean, you're talking about juggling time demands. So how about first, we actually do 20 hours a week and start there and see if that actually frees up time for students to take more classes. I know that at Michigan, I don't know how course scheduling works here, I'm sorry, but I know that at Michigan, coaches are frequently petitioning for exemptions and waivers to the rules that we have established for when athletes can be practicing so that they can take advantage of the time blocks where most of our courses are offered, right? And they're always pushing up against those limits, and we're trying to push back on the academic performance committee so that athletes can take the courses they want to take, when they want to take them. And I think a lot of that would be solved if you think about 40 hours a week, slash 20 a week off of that. That leaves you a lot of time to take classes, or to do other things, that other students get to do. So, Left.
Yeah, so you kind of talked at the beginning about the NCAA kind of splitting its athletes.
Yes.
Through pay. Do you think that there's any repercussions then in paying athletes aside from the scholarship they receive?
So would there be negative consequences to some form of revenue sharing with athletes? Well, of course, I think every kind of solution to any problem has downsides to it. But I can't think of any that would outweigh the downsides of the current model. Right? So that's kind of the way I look at it. I know that a lot of people feel that the complexity of figuring out how that would work is overwhelming. And I think, we have shot a satellite out of the solar system. I really feel like we can figure that out, even if I can't make that. So, does that answer your question, Lynn?
No, it does.
Maybe you have different thoughts about it.
No, I just have a follow-up question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So another thing I'm thinking about is like when the NCAA is like such a revenue-producing institution. I mean, even though it's nonprofit, like, do you think that academics and high-profile athletics, to the extent they are now, in one system, can those two things like coexist? I mean, they currently are, but like we're seeing athletes graduating from these institutions, taking big classes, and like you said, like barely having the same academic experiences as non-student athletes.
Right. So you're asking, are they getting...
How can you let them, if we're here, we're choosing to do sports, we want to be as good as we can be.
Of course, and you want to win championships. And
right. So we were being limited in that to try to expand ourselves academically. It seems like it's sort of shooting yourself in the foot.
So what do you think? Would you like to see the 20-hour limit lifted so that it would be just legit to work as many hours as you're working on your sport?
I think it's not simple. That's why it hasn't been solved.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, athletes, okay, so in this respect, I don't think athletes are different from any of the rest of us. We all have competing, conflicting priorities, right? Things we want to get done and a finite kind of level of resources in terms of time, energy, and abilities to get all those things done, right? So there again, I feel that it's better not to view it as a kind of separate case scenario. Other students have the same issue. Your own analogy about residents in med school, right? So I feel that two things. First, if there's a 20-hour rule, there should be adherence to that 20-hour rule. If there's a problem with that, then the rule needs to be revisited. Okay, so that's the first thing I would say about that. I recognize and respect your desire to excel and to win championships, alongside your desire to excel academically, put yourself in a position for future success in your career or advanced study or whatever. I don't see any reason, really, why those desires cannot be addressed and accommodated, even if the outcomes can't be in every case. But that's just life. But it's life. I don't know what else to say about that. There's a million things I would like to still be able to accomplish that I already know I will not accomplish. But that doesn't mean I don't accommodate the desire for them and put in time to do those things, right? And then, you sort of like live that process and see what comes of it after that. Maybe you win a championship, maybe you don't, but you're better for having put what you put into it. At the same time as you learn, this is on you guys too, you're learning to balance these things. We all have to do that. That doesn't go away. It doesn't end when your college career ends. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. That's kind of a shitty answer.
You guys talk about this one also. I'm just wondering what the relationship between the Night Commission and the NCAA actually is. Because I know the Night Commission is supposed to be the number one for players, but I'm hearing lately that it's kind of a puppet of
That's interesting. Right. So I don't know if people could hear in the back. Zach was asking about the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics, which was it's a nonprofit organization formed in the late 80s, I believe, to try to study problems in intercollegiate athletics from the point of view primarily of academic integrity issues, right? And reining in the degree to which commercialization, going back to some of these questions, may impinge upon the academic mission of institutions and their athletes. And Zach asked, he had heard, I guess, or something like that, are they kind of a puppet of the NCAA? And I would say the answer is not a puppet, no. But I do think that they, like many institutions, other organizations that, some of which I'm a part of, that are seeking to reform intercollegiate athletics, the primary motivation seems to be the restoration or safeguarding of an academic integrity kind of mission that they believe is imperiled by the presence of athletics in their current form. Okay? So that allows them at times to kind of dovetail or align themselves with NCAA policies, even as, because after all, that's what the NCAA says all over the place. Right? They too care about that. So at the same time, I see that they do push for reforms. And it might be easy to think about this kind of from a political sort of analogy. There's a lot of organizations out there that are seeking to reform within the NCAA system, and people within the NCAA trying to reform the NCAA. So these changes happen on a lot of different fronts at the same time, right? It's a huge, huge system. So there are people working within universities, within athletic departments, probably right here, looking to make these issues work out better. There are people at Michigan doing that. There are people in the NCAA doing that. There are people at these independent institutions doing that. And then there are some that are pushing for more dramatic and radical changes, right? That may not go down, right, at the level of the NCAA. That may be hashed out, as in some cases they already are, in the courts, right? But that's also part of why we have courts, to help us figure out and articulate what our collective priorities are. And of course, whether we're following the law. Yes?
You talked about teachers, you talked about the students. I'm wondering if you have ideas about some possibilities for change for coaches. I know, like here at Oberlin, I do cross-country track. Coaches are very flexible about practice and talk.
That's great.
But there's always going to be a conflict of interest for the coaches. They're trying to get as much out of their athletes as possible. I know the D3 programs, even in other sports, you can't just miss basketball practice. It's a team sport. I wonder if you have ideas for what coaches could do differently to support your ideas.
To support my ideas? Did everybody hear that question? So the question was focusing on coaches and what is the role that coaches can play in let's just say, in the major kind of aim of integrating academics and athletics. I think it sounds like your coaches are doing is a good start, right? To show kind of flexibility and a recognition. It's no different than teachers. To show the recognition that students or athletes, or as at Michigan, also employees, are whole beings, right? And that our job as their mentors, whether we are coaches or professors, is to help them discover all of the facets of their being, to experiment, sometimes make mistakes in trying to integrate and balance those facets of their being, and so to encourage as much as possible a certain degree of autonomy in making those choices, right? I mean, at least that's what I try to do with my students. You don't want to come to class, don't come to class. Find out what happens. That's an experiment. Well, it is. It's an experiment. I'm not a cop. Do what you feel. You'll find out. Maybe it'll be fine, right? Maybe you want a larger sample size, so you can do it again. Find out, it's not working out. Now I got a paper to write, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Right? And something like that might happen to an athlete who is given the autonomy to make choices and does so by persistently prioritizing academic endeavors over athletic endeavors. They may finally start to fall behind, and so they got to make an adjustment to the experiment. I really believe strongly in that we have responsibilities to mentor and to guide, but not to police, right? To provide tools with which people can kind of, in an informed way, experiment with their own lives. Because after you leave college, you're going to be doing that every day without anybody there to tell you how to do it. And it's hard. It's really hard. So the more practice you get doing that now, the better, because there's a net. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Oh, yes?
I could just offer an anecdote to expand the space and the possibilities, and that's that I knew a student who got her undergraduate bachelor's diploma at age 30, but that's because she was essentially a professional ballerina from age 16 to 26.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly. And I mean, one of the things that I think about when we talk about schools like Michigan is give more time to degrees. That would be another way to do this. You don't want to stick to 20 hours? Okay. Give them 8 years to finish their college degree. Right? Rather than right now where it's 4, kind of 5. That could make a difference. You know? So yeah, I mean, I think there are abundant examples in the world out there of people who have to commit an enormous amount of time to become excellent at something, and in the process, make some sacrifices of different kinds. I just don't want the sacrifice to be that students have to pretend they're not something they are when they come into class. That's a sacrifice that I think is unacceptable. Whatever that may be, whether it has to do with sports or not sports, that doesn't matter. Any other questions? Thank you. These are really great questions. Yeah, sure.
So you talk a lot about the empowerment of student athletes through a change in the college system.
I talked a lot about what? I'm sorry.
The empowerment of student
Empowerment,
athletes,
yeah.
to pursue their educational careers and their sporting careers through systematic change and through changes of the people who hold power over their daily lives. What kind of advice do you give your student athletes in pursuing a more fulfilling educational experience? And do the students really have any power in the current system? Is there anything that people can do?
Students always have power. You always have power. That would be the first thing. You have power. You're making choices all the time. So you get to choose whether you want to be aware of the choices you're making and understand why you're making them and how to make them and what the effects of those are. It goes back to the experiment thing. Or to, imagine that you are a kind of passive object, right? A doll that someone else is kind of shoveling around between classrooms and the gym and the field and so forth. So first advice is you have power. Second advice is it's your life. You are the one who's going to have to live it and live with it, hopefully for a really long time. Not your coaches, not me, not your friends, not your parents even. You have to live that life and live with it. So I think that can be a very powerful kind of filtering device for considering the choices we make, if you really let it weigh on you, if you really let it sort of impact you, instead of thinking outwardly all the time, right? Will I be approved of in this way? Will I be punished in this way? It's better, I think, to think in terms of kind of cause and effect, right? With yourself, your desire, your interests as the sort of driving force, pushing you into that web of cause and effects. A lot of what happens in that web would be unpredictable, and some of it will be unfortunate, and some of it will be your fault, but it will be yours. So, if you want, more concretely, I don't know if you're asking,
what do you tell your students?
I tell them that.
Do you tell them?
I tell them that. Yeah.
Even for those who, let's say they're on the basketball team.
Absolutely.
And that was the only avenue through which they could get to the school that they're at.
Yes. Yes. I mean, they're there now. So, I tell them, I got the basketball players in the class, and I show them a slide that says that 2/3 of them think that they're going to be pros. Right? And then I show them the slide that says maybe one of them, once in a while, is going to make it into pros. Right? So you're here now. What's your backup? What else are you doing? Right? Because it's your life. You're going to have to live with it in 15 years if you made the choice to go all in for the NBA and you don't make it. Right? And I actually have a friend, you saw him in the video saying that he still talks the most shit, named Jimmy King, who played basketball at Michigan 25 years ago now, and who comes back to the class and tells the students the same thing. Like, Jimmy has struggled in his adult life at times. And it's partly because of misfortunes and partly because of choices that he made at a certain point in time to go all in for a pro career that didn't pay off. Right? And he tells them the same thing. Like, what is your backup plan? Any others? Yes?
Forgive me if this is too big picture, but you are talking about integrating, you are talking about talking to the administrators how to support programs, design whole universities. And first I'll go even mega and say one lesson I get from looking at the sports world that I'm trying to apply to the rest of the world is that sports have seasons. We don't have the basketball championship in the same week as the Super Bowl, football championship, let alone the same night. We don't have that type of conflict. We have scheduled times where we're madly organized in seasons by sports. So in the whole world, what if we said the last week of every month is for international focus, and the first week of every month is for medical focus, and society could organize itself differently. So back down to the university level, if we did not create as many conflicts at 4 in the afternoon between sports practice and political lectures, then I, as a humanities and science or politics student, would get to go share at games, observe, maybe even play sports, which I never did. And vice versa. So if we can set up schedules that are wise that prevent some of the conflicts and some of these choices, it's not just an individual balancing among endlessly futile choices.
Sure, I get your point. I mean, I think that sounds like a conversation that needs to be had, I would say. I know that there are a lot of constraints operating on scheduling different activities. You know, we got into this room late because there was an interesting lecture that went on here a little bit longer than planned. Field and facilities are used by lots of different teams, and so, you know, I recognize there are difficulties there. I think the important thing is to articulate the desire to find the best possible balance when it comes to scheduling activities in ways that might help to at least minimize those conflicts. You know, but I want to emphasize, they're not going to go away. There's going to be conflicts. You have to make choices. There's just not a way not to do that. That is, as far as I can tell. I mean, I don't want to pontificate more than I have, but as far as I can tell, that's the way of the world. There is a scarcity of time and resources, life itself. And so we work within those constraints. That doesn't mean we can't expand them or push on them. We can. But at some point, we also got to remember, okay, so now I got to choose and I miss this. Yeah?
How do you recommend that students navigate situations where they feel that a professor discriminates against athletes or doesn't like athletes for some reason?
How do I recommend that a student?
Yeah, so if one of your students says to you, I can tell that my professor thinks I'm dumb because I wear sports gear to class, how do you recommend that they navigate that situation?
Well, there's a lot of different paths there, and I think it depends a lot on the personality of the student and on the personality of the faculty member. Sometimes it can just be a misunderstanding or a misperception. So potentially, simply speaking to the faculty member and saying, I'm wondering, is there something that I'm doing that's really not what's necessary for this class, or I'm falling short in some way, because I'm getting the impression that you're seeing me this way. Alternatively, if that's not a comfortable conversation to have, at Michigan there's different sorts of avenues that I'm sure they're here too. Like we have a faculty athletics representative, right, who's appointed by the president, not by the athletic department. And so that student could go to the FAR, right, and say, this is the kind of problem I'm having, and then the FAR can communicate back to the faculty to try and help mediate or ease that situation in some way or another. Those are the two paths that I usually find have worked the best at Michigan. But, I think that there are also other possibilities, perhaps speaking to a coach, speaking to a different professor and getting opinions. Sometimes professors know each other, and we realize, this has certainly happened to me there, where a student has that feeling, and I say, I think you're probably just reading, and I know this because I know this person well. I've worked with them for 20 years. Something else is going on that you don't know about. And I understand why you're taking it like it's you, or they're prejudice against you, but that's actually not what I think is going on. Try this, for this being whatever X, right?
Thanks.